In my previous video, I said that it is true that capitalism oppresses all the poor regardless of their identity. It is also true that not all forms of oppression are the same. And in this video, I will talk about those different forms of oppression, and how they mix with different forms of privilege. We often feel empowered to protest all the forms of our oppression. But we often feel threatened when asked to admit all of our privileges. We think of privilege as something we are simply given, as if none of our talents or efforts have anything to do with achieving our goals. But this is a mistake. As Tumblr blogger Hero of Three Faces wrote, in 2015,
privilege is not about what you get or don't get, but about obstruction you don't have in getting it.
But it is hard to visualize something that is not there. So let me illustrate. Here, we see a figure that's coded as a white man. Since he represents the most privileged, let's assume he is cisgendered, already at the end of the rainbow, with its pot of gold. I'm going to put some distance there, and an obstacle in his way. But I will also label the privileges that the most privileged won't acknowledge. So now here's our guy with a little more distance, and tricky terrain, between himself and his heart's desire. And it will take some ingenuity to get there. But his privileges, that he is white, a native-born citizen of his nation, and wealthy, raise him high enough above the barrier that he barely has to think about it. And please bear in mind, like a child's first guide to the solar system, this is vastly oversimplified, and not to scale. Now, let's remove his white privilege, and make him a black man. Simply removing that privilege already makes the very same obstacle the white man faced harder to cross. But the burden of being black in a racist society also lessens the privilege of citizenship and wealth. Since the black man cannot trust the protection of the law the way a white man can. If a racist cop should suspect that the fancy car he drives was stolen, or was bought with drug money, but the wealthy black man still has privilege over the poor black man, who cannot afford a good lawyer, should he have a run-in with the same racist cop. And the poor white man may not need fear the police to the same degree as the black man. But he still gets fewer benefits from the privilege of citizenship than the wealthy man, because so many of our legal rights depend on having a fixed, and recognized, mailing address and phone number. And if you are poor, neither of those things can be taken for granted. It will always be a privilege to be wealthy in a capitalist society. And it will always be a privilege to be white in a white supremacist society. Even as we suffer from oppression and discrimination at the same time. And what about me? A disabled, white, woman, with an upper-middle-class background? Because of my parents' white privilege during the era of racial segregation. They were granted, and could afford, the health care that saved my life the day I was born, but my rights as a citizen are weighed down. Because current anti-discrimination laws have no teeth. And businesses can argue that accommodating the disabled pose an undue burden to their profits. And although my parents could afford to support me going to college, with financial aid, a loophole in U.S. federal employment law for employing the disabled, meant the only job I was offered after graduating was to work on an assembly line, putting raw eggs into cartons, at a salary far below minimum wage. But the weight of oppression also varies with context. Because my disability is only that I am mobility impaired, I am free to travel anywhere in cyberspace, the way I cannot in physical space, and I can enjoy the benefits of my education, and more fully participate in society. And thanks to the internet, I've gotten the opportunity to meet, and work with, people with different disabilities and different needs. And through that, and time, I've begun to recognize my privilege, and when I can use it to help others. We feel how we are oppressed, and we tend to take our privileges for granted. We see how others are privileged, and don't see how they are oppressed. Even though all the different forms of oppression grow out of the same capitalist hierarchy. Like a bunch of gene mutations in an antibiotic-resistant superbug, these power structures have evolved over centuries to help capitalism maintain itself and spread. But we can evolve, too, learn from one another, and resist.